This is a continuation of Robert Swindell's The Ice Palace, pages 22 to 35. Painfully, Ivan hauled himself up into the ice-lacquered branches and sat, gazing down. The wolves milled, snarling, around the foot of the tree. Their slavering jaws were upturned, and their breath rose in plums around him. Now and then a wolf would leap, its jaws snapping within inches of his feet. Soon, Ivan began to feel cold. The wind whipped through the bare branches, and his dangling legs became numb. Soon he knew the frost would be in his fingers. It would spread through his hands until they could no longer grip, and he would fall into that whirling mass of fur and fangs. "Go away!" he cried. "Oh, go away and find something else to kill!" But the wolves gazed at him with their cruel eyes, and their jaws seemed to grin. "They know," sobbed Ivan. "They know that I'm freezing. They're waiting for me to fall." He clung desperately to his perch. The cold began to seep through his hands. He cried softly, and his tears froze on his cheeks. "Farewell, little brother," he whispered. "I can never save you now." His eyes felt heavy, and his head sank slowly until his chin rested on his chest. He was going to sleep. The cold was going away. He smiled a little. He had only to let go now, and he could sleep and sleep until the end of the world. A startled yelp roused him. He shook his head and looked down. The wolves were scattering in all directions, and in their midst, rearing on its hind legs, was a huge bear. Its terrible claws hissed through the air, and the wolves fell back snapping. The bear lunged at them, and they turned tail, slipping away between the frozen trees. Ivan cried out joyfully, then gaped with horror. Bears kill people, and bears can climb! He pulled up his feet, trying to move higher. The bear dropped onto all its 4 feet and stood a moment, snarling into the forest. Then, with only an upward glance at the boy, it loped off, melting soon among the shadows of the pines. Stiffly, Ivan climbed down. He peered fearfully all around, but the wolves were gone, and there was no sign of the bear. All that day, little Ivan walked on. Now and then he would break off a little of the bread in his pocket and chew it as he walked. And when it began to grow dark, he found another snowdrift and made a cave inside. He ate more of the bread and snuggled down to sleep. At midnight, he awoke, and it seemed to him he had heard a voice. He listened. Outside, the wind was howling. After a moment, he closed his eyes again. "It must have been the wind," he said to himself. "Only the wind." But no sooner had he closed his eyes than he seemed to hear the voice again. He got up, knelt by the hole, and stuck his head out. The cold made him gasp. Ivan screwed up his eyes and peered into the darkness. There was nothing, only the tossing of the pines and clouds of wind-blown snow. Then, just as he was about to draw his head back inside, he thought he saw a movement under the trees. A small figure flitting across a paler patch between the shadows. Ivan cried out, clambering from the snowdrift. The figure, it seemed impossible, but from here it had looked like, "Little brother!" he cried. "Wait!" He was stumbling through deep snow. As he drew near, the small figure seemed to move back, so that he was always the same distance away from it. "Wait!" he cried again. "Oh, don't run away! It is Ivan, come to take you home." But the figure was only a smudge now, a shadow in the shadows, and as he watched it, faded and was gone. And he heard laughter in the wind and whirled around, but no one was there. The cold was like knives in his feet, and he looked down at himself through his tears. "My boots!" he gasped. "I left them in the snowdrift, and my mittens too." He turned. "I must go back at once or I will die." He knew that the figure in the trees had been Starjack's cruel trick, and the laughter in the wind, Starjack's laughter. But when he looked around, he could not tell which way he had come. He ran, first this way, and then that. stumbling in the snow, but no way seemed to be the right way. The voice laughed more loudly in the wind. Ivan stopped. He was lost, and knew that very soon he would fall into a sleep from which he would never awaken. He closed his eyes and was about to sink down in the snow when he heard a shrill scream. He jerked his head round and saw a white shape that flew soundlessly between the trees. As he watched, it settled on a branch and stared at him with great yellow eyes. "Go away, Snowy Owl," he whispered. "Go away and find a mouse to eat. I am no use to you. I am no use to anyone." The owl leapt from its perch with a scream, circled its head on velvet wings, and made off through the forest. After a moment, it came back and flew round his head again. "Perhaps," thought Ivan, "it wants me to follow it." He was becoming very weary, but when the great white bird flew away again, he followed. In a few moments, he saw the snowdrift in which he had made his shelter. He fell to his knees by the entrance and crawled inside with the last of his strength. The snowy owl circled the snowdrift once and was gone. When dawn came, Ivan wrapped himself up in his warm clothing and set out again. There was only a little bread left now in his pocket, and he knew he must save it, for he still had far to go.